Salut tout le monde, c'est Chris. Dans la vidéo d'aujourd'hui, on se retrouve pour le 3e épisode hors introduction de ce documentaire que nous a sorti Candace Owens au sujet d'Emmanuel et de Brigitte Macron. Dans la vidéo du jour, nous allons nous focaliser un peu plus sur les parents d'Emmanuel Macron qui sont assez bizarres, assez mystérieux quant à leur passé, leur profession, mais également sur ce défunt ex-mari de Brigitte Macron qui, comme beaucoup l'ont remarqué, il n'y a pas eu beaucoup de photos de lui. Encore une fois, des mensonges, il y a pas mal de théories qui ressortent, pas mal de théories du complot. Également, on va voir que il y a certains projets, certaines choses qui font froid dans le dos qu'on va essayer de débunker ensemble aujourd'hui. Donc si vous êtes intéressés, continuez à regarder. Mais avant de commencer la vidéo, n'hésitez surtout pas à vous abonner et activer la cloche de notification pour être toujours au rendez-vous. Actualité, polémique, scandale, people, télé-réalité, story time. Ici, on parle de tout. Et n'hésitez pas à faire un tour en barre d'infos si vous souhaitez davantage soutenir la chaîne. Merci beaucoup. Bon, je crois que je me suis pris aujourd'hui pour Élise Lucet parce que j'ai littéralement investi dans un iPad où j'ai vraiment annoté pas mal de choses, des choses qui me semblent importantes, des choses que je vais vous lire à travers cette vidéo, des choses qui, selon moi, en fait, sont un peu troublantes, honnêtement. Donc je vais un petit peu regarder l'iPad et je trouve que ça fait un peu plus classe, un peu plus pro. On investit ici, voilà, je ne sais pas pour qui je me prends, Élise Lucet en sueur, Élise Lucet sur vous, mais voilà, c'était la petite bonne nouvelle de la journée, donc j'espère que ça vous fait également plaisir qu'on investit et qu'on essaie de vous proposer du contenu de qualité. Du moins, je dis bien essayer, hein. Je dis bien essayer. Ah oui, j'ai acheté un crayon comme ça qui coûte une blinde, voilà, qui coûte cette petite merde, 149 €. Voilà, donc n'hésitez pas à vous abonner, merci beaucoup. Bon, qu'est-ce que nous a sorti Candace Owens dans ce 3e épisode de son documentaire Devenir Brigitte? Elle va commencer par nous parler de ce fameux projet qui a vu le jour dans les années 50 aux États-Unis, le projet MK Ultra. C'est un projet extrêmement dangereux qui a fait beaucoup débat, qui a fait beaucoup parler dans les années 70, également fin des années 70, à tel point que Bill Clinton lui-même avait dû présenter des excuses devant le peuple américain, le monde entier, vraiment. C'est un projet qui visait tout simplement à contrôler les masses, contrôler les puissances et contrôler les gens. Ce projet a vu le jour le 14 avril 1953 et si des gens pensent qu'il y a un lien entre Brigitte Macron et ce fameux projet MK Ultra, c'est parce que Brigitte Macron, elle, est née le 13 avril 1953. Beaucoup y voient une coïncidence, beaucoup y voient aucun lien. Personnellement, je pense que je n'y verrai aucun lien. Après, bon, j'ai envie de vous dire, on vit maintenant dans un monde où tout le monde peut donner son avis et où il y a plein de théories du complot. Bon, pourquoi pas? Est-ce qu'il y a un vrai lien? Je n'en sais trop rien. Mais c'est un projet qui a fait beaucoup parler de par ses actions, comment il a été réalisé. C'est-à-dire que, en fait, des membres de la CIA ont testé des substances, donc des drogues, des produits radioactifs, des produits toxiques sur des soldats, puis à grande échelle sur des populations en les libérant dans l'air à l'aide d'avions et de hélicoptères, etc. Ça avait fait beaucoup parler à l'époque, je vous dis, hein, ça a duré une vingtaine d'années. Si bien que quand ça s'est terminé, tout avait été détruit, les documents avaient été vraiment détruits, brûlés, sauf que quelques années après, en 77, on a retrouvé un carton avec plus de 20 000 pages de ce fameux projet, de ces fameuses archives de MK Ultra, et Bill Clinton, comme je vous l'ai dit juste avant, a dû s'excuser au monde entier de par la violence et de par la barbarie qu'il y a pu avoir dans ces fameux tests réalisés sur des gens. Donc c'est tout bonnement atroce. Alors personnellement, je ne vois pas trop le lien entre Brigitte Macron et ce fameux projet MK Ultra. Est-ce que ça voudrait dire que Brigitte est un enfant, une espèce de bébé éprouvette qui a été créé, un espèce d'humain test pour être contrôlé? Est-ce que c'est là où veut en venir Candace Owens? Je trouve que ça va un petit peu loin. Faudrait mieux rester sur du factuel et vous voyez, hein, vraiment, même si j'aime beaucoup cette enquête, si vous voulez, je pense qu'il faut quand même rester les pieds au sol, vraiment ne pas partir dans tous les sens parce qu'il y a des choses extrêmement graves qui peuvent être dites et je ne pense pas que il y a le projet MK Ultra qui était en lien avec Brigitte Macron. Vous voyez, je pense que les États-Unis dans les années 50 avaient beaucoup mieux à faire que de créer des espèces d'agents qui seraient contrôlés par les plus grandes puissances pour faire des choses totalement atroces. Mais si vous voulez y croire, libre à vous d'y croire, libre à vous de me donner votre avis en commentaire d'ailleurs. N'hésitez pas, hein, bien évidemment, courtoisie et respect, me parler de votre avis et me dire ce que vous en pensez. Mais je trouve qu'on va un petit peu trop loin, des fois, par moment. Hein, vraiment, Candace, reste sur du factuel, s'il te plaît. Merci. Ce qui est intéressant par contre, c'est dans ce nouvel épisode de son documentaire, elle va nous parler des parents d'Emmanuel Macron. Donc de Jean-Michel Macron, déjà coïncidence, le père de Macron a le même prénom que le frère disparu de Brigitte Macron. Bon, pourquoi pas, ainsi que de sa mère, Françoise Noguès. On en a déjà parlé à plusieurs reprises, cette fameuse Françoise avait travaillé, d'après beaucoup de dires, d'après beaucoup de témoignages, elle travaillait dans les bureaux de la sécurité sociale. Elle était chargée d'aider les patients et patientes qui voulaient faire une transition. Les patients qui avaient besoin de ressources, de logements, etc. Elle était chargée de tout cela. C'est pas elle qui faisait les opérations ou quoi que ce soit. J'ai vu des choses passer sur internet qui étaient tout bonnement folles, vraiment. Mais elle était chargée d'un petit peu aider, aiguiller et renseigner les gens sur comment faire une bonne transition, lequel médecin aller voir, le meilleur médecin, etc. etc. Encore une fois, on parle de coïncidence ici. Il n'y a pas, j'ai envie de dire, il y a des éléments qui se rejoignent entre Brigitte Macron qui est accusée d'avoir fait une transition, la mère de Macron, elle travaillait à la sécurité sociale et s'occupait des dossiers de personnes qui faisaient des transitions. J'ai envie de vous dire au bout d'un moment les coïncidences. Après, il y a d'autres personnes, les gens qui ont fait comment on appelle ça, des témoignages, qui nous ont dit qu'ils ont été, aidés par la mère de France, d'Emmanuel Macron. Au bout d'un moment, je sais pas, ça fait quand même pas mal de coïncidences vis-à-vis de tout cela. Mais selon moi, c'est pas ça le pire dans cette histoire. Pour moi, encore une fois, le pire, c'est l'âge la différence d'âge qu'il y a entre Emmanuel Macron et Brigitte Macron. Je vous laisse regarder déjà la première partie de la vidéo où elle nous parle du coup des parents d'Emmanuel Macron. Écoutez bien.
Now, earlier, I told you that Macron's alleged biological parents, you see here up on the screen, had some interesting jobs just off the bat. His father, Jean-Michel Macron, was a psychiatrist. And yes, of course, we know for a fact that psychiatrists have done some evil things, some very evil things throughout the years. Don't even get me started before I should actually get started, go onto a tangent about who Sigmund Freud was and how disturbing it is that he is taught within our school systems here in America as some sort of a hero, that he broke through modern psychiatry. Yeah, how much of a breakthrough and a contribution did he make? Again, we'll pause and talk about that in a different episode so as not to get lost. But yes, Daddy Macron was a psychiatrist, and his mother, Frances, she's very important there on the right, was a pediatrician. What an absolute combo for Emmanuel Macron growing up, right? Well, interestingly enough, something very interesting was discovered about his mother, Françoise. Sorry, I think I said Frances, Françoise. Now, we told you she was a pediatrician who also served as a medical advisor to the Social Security office. Well, eventually something very interesting came up about her and her work for the Social Security Administration, okay? This I'm going to read straight from journalist Xavier Poussard's upcoming book, which he is going to be available on Amazon. If in case you want to skip through to the end of the story and see where it ends. He writes, quote, "Faced with the wall of Emmanuel Macron's childhood, we decided to screen it meticulously with this question in mind. Why did the family refuse to respond to journalists' requests? And why did they need Brigitte's approval? A hearing at the French National Assembly caught our attention. It was that of Sylvain Telesfort. She was giving a testimony. Sylvain Telesfort was the president of the Institute for Intersexuality and Hermaphroditism and the Association of Europe. Now, she was born in Beauvais in 1956 under the name Sylvain Telesfort, and then changed her name to Sylvain by a court ruling in Paris on May 15, 2007. So actually, Sylvain was born a he, and he incidentally revealed to the French National Assembly that he had been given administrative support in his gender transition by a senior doctor at the Primary Health Insurance Fund, Dr. Yep, you guessed it, Françoise Macron, also known as Emmanuel Macron's mother. So a person who had transitioned suddenly testifies and says, actually, yeah, the person that assisted me in doing that was Dr. Nogue. Françoise Macron actually assisted me with this transition. So we know that that took place, that she was involved in supporting gender transitions. The question then remained whether this was simply a unique case or whether Macron's mother had been involved in this category of work, assisting people who were transgendered more extensively, and the answer came out last year when an intersex individual, goes by the name Alexandra, described how she had benefited from, quote, waivers granted by the National Referral Advisor, Dr. Françoise Macron-Nogue, who, it must be said, is the mother of the current president. She has done a tremendous amount of work following all kinds of generations of people like me, granting subsidies so that we can have access to the best specialists, so that we can take our time, and so that in everyday life, we are not on the margins. If people were rejected by their families, she would find them a small room, and they would receive a disability pension for the duration of the trip. In short, it was very, very well organized. I don't understand why people despise this protocol, end quote. In a second interview, she explained that Françoise Nogue was concerned with a particular pathology known as primary congenital pseudo-hermaphroditism. But you know, you guys, I'm sure all of that is just a coincidence. All of it. I mean, anyone who does not understand how these things just keep happening in the world is just a crazy conspiracy theorist, right? Just a crazy conspiracy theorist. I mean, yeah, okay, I get it. We've got some questions about the gender of his wife, why her past doesn't seem to be coming together. We have some questions, sure, yes, about his past. His dad is a psychiatrist. His mother does some specialty work assisting people in their transitions, and they kept this quiet when they got married. And sure, when they became the president and the first lady, they just had all of these either transgendered or pedophilic type things keep popping up. But I'm sure all of this is a coincidence, guys. The books, everything, it's just one big coincidence.
Maintenant, nous allons passer à la deuxième partie de la vidéo sur les incohérences des témoignages de Brigitte Macron vis-à-vis de l'âge entre elle et Emmanuel. À un coup, elle disait il avait 17 ans, à un autre coup c'est 14 ans, à un autre coup c'est 15 ans. Et il y a quelque chose qu'elle a dit dans la vidéo qui était selon moi très intéressant, Candace Owens, et qui révèle, qui vaut pour tout le monde bien évidemment, c'est que si tu es obligé de mentir, tu es obligé de te souvenir de tout ce que tu as dit, à qui, à quoi, pour tenir la même version, pour toujours dire la même chose et ne jamais répéter des choses qui sont totalement fausses, qui n'ont plus de sens vraiment. Donc si tu es en train de mentir, ça va se voir au fil du temps parce que tu racontes un coup un truc une histoire à droite, une histoire à gauche et vraiment ça n'aura plus de sens. Tandis qu'une personne qui ne va pas mentir, elle va toujours dire la vérité, certes ça va s'estomper au bout d'un moment, mais l'histoire ne sera jamais changée. Et c'est vrai qu'il y a eu beaucoup d'incohérences vis-à-vis déjà des âges, vis-à-vis du passé, vis-à-vis des lieux de naissance où ont grandi les protagonistes de cette histoire, donc Brigitte et Emmanuel Macron. Il y a beaucoup d'incohérences et c'est pareil, encore une fois, des personnes qui ont fait des ouvrages, qui ont écrit des ouvrages là-dessus, qui ont mené des interviews, mené des enquêtes, fait des recherches sur tout cela, et ces personnes-là se sont heurtées à un mur. Encore une fois, ça a été très compliqué. On a eu des témoignages notamment d'anciennes personnes également qui sont passées par la case bistouri, qui ont fait des transitions et qui ont déjà parlé, encore une fois, vous l'avez vu dans la première partie, mais qui ont parlé aussi de cette fameuse transition et du lien assez étroit qu'il y a entre Emmanuel Macron, Brigitte Macron et tout ce qu'il y a en lien avec la transition. Encore une fois, c'est, je ne sais pas comment vous dire, mais ça va dormir dehors en fait, cette histoire, c'est à quel moment on va avoir la vérité, à quel moment en fait, pourquoi, moi j'aimerais savoir pourquoi, en fait, si tu veux faire taire les rumeurs, tu fais tout simplement un communiqué de presse, tu fais tu vas parler, parce que ça en parle dans le monde entier, donc si tu n'as pas envie de te tourner au ridicule, tourner la France au ridicule, et tourner également le peuple français au ridicule, et que tu te soucies, comme tu le dis si bien, Emmanuel Macron, que tu te soucies du bien-être des Français, de l'image de la France à l'international, tu ouvres ta gorge, tu dis quelque chose, tu dis écoutez, il y a ça, machin. Mais bon, c'est vrai que c'est plus simple d'aller porter plainte contre un concitoyen qui a fait une œuvre de toi, les mêmes œuvres que l'on voit dans Charlie Hebdo, mais bon, apparemment, c'est deux poids, deux mesures dans ce pays. Voyez et regardez les infos si vous n'avez pas compris de quoi je parle. Vous mettez Emmanuel Macron plainte, vous comprendrez. Bref, c'est vraiment idiot. Voilà, pour moi c'est idiot, ça... Encore une fois, ça n'a pas ça n'a aucun but, selon moi. Voilà. tout simplement un ego qui a été touché, comme dans cette histoire. C'est les égos qui sont touchés, c'est une image qui est touchée et c'est que ces personnes-là sont bientôt face au mur, au pied du mur. Est-ce qu'ils vont pouvoir continuer à avancer? Je ne sais pas. Je vous laisse regarder la deuxième partie de la vidéo.
All right, now let's get back into the story of Brigitte, because there just seems to be a lot of coincidences going on here. So we had mentioned already a journalist by the name of Sylvie Bommel, right? She's that left-leaning journalist who has bylines in Vanity Fair. Like I said, this stuff was not coming from conspiracy theorists. This is such a lie that is told to the English-speaking world. She is the one who has dedicated the most time into trying to get into the past of Brigitte, to learn about the past of Brigitte. And she just kept coming up against a wall. And again, to remind you, these journalists were like, yay, powerful woman taking charge at the Élysée Palace. I want to learn more about her so I can promote her to the world. You know, who doesn't love a strong character, especially if you're a feminist like these writers were? So she begins working on the second biography about Brigitte, entitled He Had Just Turned 17. Actually a funny title, it's an untrue title, and Sylvie Bommel actually disputes it in this very book. She lands upon a different answer in her last chapter. She writes that Emmanuel Macron had actually only just turned 15. She probably went with a different title because they would have panicked at the Élysée Palace if she went with he just turned 15, right? They probably would have been doing some terrifying things. Maybe they would have just called her into the office for a talk. Well, throughout this second investigation leading up to the publication of this book, she poured through all of these public interviews given by Brigitte and just kept coming across these little mistakes that Brigitte would make about how old she was.
Pour la troisième partie, qui est sensiblement un peu plus longue, on a maintenant le retour de ce fameux ex-mari de Brigitte Macron, ex-mari qui est décédé en 2019, alors de vieillesse ou je ne sais pas, bref, il est décédé, maintenant il ne pourra plus apporter aucun témoignage. Cependant, ce qui a été assez bizarre dans cette histoire, c'est que déjà le document qui dit ok, telle personne est morte, telle personne est décédée, c'est pas un faire-part. Est-ce que c'est un faire-part? J'ai un doute. Bref, le document qui dit voilà, ce sera à telle heure, le décès de machin, nous regrettons, nous devons vous annoncer que cette personne est décédée. La photo, déjà, j'ai pas compris. Honnêtement, je vous dis, j'ai pas compris et encore une fois, c'est des incohérences pour moi. Quand une personne vient de décéder, tu ne vas pas mettre une photo d'elle pixelisée, en noir et blanc, dans une qualité médiocre, à la plage, en maillot de bain. Alors certes, il n'y a aucun problème à être en maillot de bain, il n'y a aucun problème à aller à la plage ou quoi que ce soit, mais on parle d'une défunte personne, une personne qui vient de perdre la vie, et la seule photo que tu as de cette personne, c'est cette personne en mode genre accoutrement, genre de plage. Un minimum de respect, s'il vous plaît. On parle ici d'un homme qui a eu des enfants, on parle d'un homme qui a été marié, on parle d'un homme qui a eu une carrière, qui a travaillé dans la banque, qui a certainement beaucoup de connexions, et pareil, les gens qui étaient présent lors de ces funérailles, bah vous allez voir que c'est assez troublant également. Il y a beaucoup d'éléments en fait qui, encore une fois, sont vilains. Des éléments qui nous disent mais ils nous prennent pour des idiots ou ça se passe comment? Il y a des éléments pour moi qui n'ont aucun sens. Vraiment qui n'ont aucun sens. Je vous laisse regarder la dernière partie et dites-moi ce que vous en pensez. Regardez bien.
So one mistake that Brigitte made in this long biographical interview that she gave to Elle magazine was regarding her older sister, her late sister, Mary Vaughn, who had died in a car accident. But now when Brigitte gave this interview, she said that it was, you know, sort of this traumatic thing that was ingrained in her mind, that she was 8 years old at the time of her sister's death, and that she carried her sister around with her every single day of her life. She also stated that her niece died a year later at the age of 6. So Xavier Poussard was very troubled by this. First and foremost, right away, Sylvie Bommel was able to determine that actually, no, she wasn't 6 when her sister died, she was 8. Now that's just a 2-year difference, but I feel that by the time you're 8, if something that big happens in your life, you don't really mess up the date by 2 years. Like it would just be a very raw memory, but maybe it was just a mistake. But regarding that second person that she says died, the niece that allegedly died a year later, so this would be back-to-back big deaths in the family, he was just going, I don't see that anywhere. And he thought that that was strange because there had been so much written about Brigitte's nieces, and yet there was no mention of one who had died anywhere. So he got right to work researching it, and finally, at long at last, he was able to confirm by visiting a family plot that Brigitte's family had, that there was a niece named Sylvie who had passed away following a surgery in 1996. Okay, great. Phew. But that was nearly 6 years after her sister Mary Vaughn had died. Not 1 year, but 6. Now that's a huge difference. So what was going on? Anyways, Sylvie Bommel's main focus on this second book was really trying to learn more about Brigitte's first husband, Andre Louis Ozier, right? That's the banker that she had married when she was 21 years old, the guy who had his wife rather dramatically stolen from him by a teenager, virtuoso Mozart type guy. I mean, that's gotta hurt. And no one could get in touch with him. Remember, we spoke about Virginie Linhart, that documentary filmmaker, who similarly said this was like a black hole. She referred to him as the Elysee Palace's best kept secret. No one could get through. So there was also a magazine, Capital magazine, who summed it up in 2017 with this general impression, referring to Andre Louis, the first husband, as, quote, a real ghost. Not a single photograph of him on the web. Not a single image in the thick press agency catalogs. Biographies barely mention his career as a banker. What ever happened to Brigitte Macron's ex-husband? So having renewed her investigation again, Sylvie Bommel, she also remarked how weird it was that this man who had worked at 2 big banks, one of them being Credit du Nord, seemingly left the industry without a trace. She wrote in her book that it was, quote, like an episode of Black Mirror, where the president's offices have found a way to penetrate the brains of his former acquaintances and erase everything. Prior to the release of her book, Sylvie decided to release a few excerpts from her book, okay, in this magazine called Le Point. And then suddenly, at long last, in that magazine, in April of 2019, ahead of her book publication, a wedding photo, emerged from Brigitte's first marriage. So they're now in office, and then we are now 2 years that they've been in office about, and here we go, ta-da. Actually, I guess you could say a year and 3 months. Ta-da, boom, here is a picture from Brigitte's first marriage, allegedly. Here it is. Here's the photo. I want you to look at it. Just take a look at that photo. We're told that's Andre Louis, and that's Brigitte Trogneux. Now, I have to tell you, I am not a facial recognition software, but that woman, we can keep this up for a bit, guys, does not look to me like the current First Lady Brigitte Macron. Okay, I know faces change, but that does not look to me like the current First Lady Brigitte Macron. Okay, just take a look at this side by side. Shortly after begins a career. Maybe I could say these people are related, but just checking it, I'd say nope. What happened to your teeth? Did you start smoking crack? This is not, who is this person in this photo? Okay, but you can't just make assumptions on the basis of looking at people and deciding what's true and what's false. And we do, by the way, they were able to find, Sylvie Bommel was able to find a marriage certificate, which certifies that in Le Ticket, somebody named Brigitte Trogneux definitely did marry someone named Andre Louis Ozier on June 22nd, 1974. So that checks out. And not only that, but the best man at the wedding was her brother, Jean-Michel Trogneux. And that was a huge breakthrough, because this tells us that Brigitte was extremely close with her brother. If you made him the best man of your brother, the best man at your wedding, you would assume that means that you were super de-duper close. But the public was only just learning about Jean-Michel. So they're going, well, this is weird. Why did you fundamentally erase him from your life? Like, is this like the worst family feud ever? Once you became the first lady? Yeah, that seems a bit strange. So here are some more weird facts that I'm going to share with you. In our legal letter, we specifically asked Brigitte Macron, well ahead of today's publication, to confirm to us in writing that she, the current First Lady of France, is in fact the woman that is pictured in this photo. And she refused to answer our question. Okay? Here it is. We've got this letter. She refused specifically to answer the question as to whether or not that was her. You see number 8. Is Brigitte Macron the same person pictured in the Ozier wedding photo? No response. And what's more interesting is that it's not the first time that she refused to answer that basic question. She also refused to provide a basic answer to that question in a court case, a defamation case against the journalist Natasha Ray. You've been hearing about this. She won in defamation case. Well, now I'm going to tell you the details here of how Natasha Ray lost a defamation case. Not to her claim that Brigitte Macron was a man or lived as a man before transitioning, if you will, to Brigitte Macron, but rather by getting details wrong, okay? By speculating. She looked at this photo of Andre Louise Ozier in the wedding, and she, in her mind, said, I don't think this guy ever existed. And actually, the man in that photo looks much more to me like a different guy named Louis Andre. Yeah, literally just flip the name. So you have Andre Louis in the photo. She thought that in that photo was actually Louis Andre, who is in fact his first cousin. So she speculated. She just made that assertion. Like that's not, they're just pretending, and that's whoever it is that his first cousin married. But Natasha was in fact wrong, okay? So the Élysée Palace called up Louis Andre, had a conversation, and encouraged him to sue her for defamation, which he did. So again, I want to be very clear. What was at root in that defamation case, it was not whether or not Brigitte Macron was born a male. And I also want to be clear here that that defamation case would not have taken place were it not for the intervention of the Élysée Palace, promising that they would join in on a lawsuit, even though they never did. Now, how do we know they did that? Because another journalist, another left-leaning journalist, feminist, named Emmanuelle Anizon, who similarly wrote a book about Brigitte Macron, wanting to debunk all of the rumors about whether or not Brigitte was born a man. She was the only journalist who actually penetrated through to the Ozier family. She actually spent time with that misidentified cousin, Louis Andre. And he told her how it all went down, and she recorded it in her book. The story goes that the cousin, John Louis, had a wife named Catherine Adoy, and convinced of her theory that he was actually the man in the photo, she contacted his wife. Natasha Ray contacts his wife, Catherine, on WhatsApp, and she sends a message at 3 a.m. in the morning. She's like on to the story. She knows something weird, and she goes with her instincts rather than the facts, and she writes to this woman, I know everything, absolutely everything, for you, for John Louis, for Jean-Michel. And I guess for her, this was like a journalistic strategy of not really knowing everything, knowing something was wrong, but hoping that if you pretended that you knew everything, that person might be forthcoming. But Catherine wasn't forthcoming. She instantly showed it to her husband and was like, what is going on? And so her husband contacted Laurence Ozier, just reminding you that's Brigitte's alleged firstborn daughter, who also happens to be his cardiologist. And Laurence says, you got to call Brigitte. You got to call mom, because she's thinking about filing a complaint too. This is harassment. So he does. The cousin calls up Brigitte, and here is what he tells the journalist happened next in his own words. Quote, Brigitte tells me she's sorry and that it's all her fault, that we need to press charges, and that she agrees to file a joint action. I hear Emmanuel Macron's voice in the background asking him to hurry up because they must leave. Before hanging up, she promises to send me a copy of her family record book, which she didn't. I also asked her to certify in writing, which she did, pardon. I also asked her to certify in writing that it was her in the 1974 wedding photo with Andre, which she didn't. I did not speak to her directly on the subject after that. So again, he says that she's like, yeah, no, file. I'm going to file with you. Do this. And he's like, well, could you send me just like in writing? Because, obviously this will be proof. Get these people in trouble. Just say you are certifying that that's you in the wedding photo. And Brigitte at the Élysée Palace says no, or goes cold. Afterwards, he makes good on his side of the deal. He files a complaint against Natasha Ray. He sends documents to Brigitte's lawyers. Brigitte then calls him back and says, you know what? Actually, the palace is recommending that we file our actions separately. Here's what John Louis says happens next. Quote, she told me that the Élysée preferred to launch two separate actions. She was walking out on me, it clearly meant. It clearly meant if you want to continue You're on your own. Get a lawyer of your own. We had already filed a complaint. There was no turning back, so we went ahead on our own. Since then, when I tried to call Brigitte back, I don't get through to her, but to her secretary, who has become unreachable. So long story short, the First Lady played him, right? She got him all fired up and said, file, we're going to file with you, blah, blah, blah. He's like, okay, can you certify that? And nope, they were manipulated, and then they were betrayed by the presidential couple. And the journalist recounts that you can definitely tell that he's a bit stung, that the Oziers felt a bit stung by that. Very strange, again, such an easy thing to certify, but what she really wanted, Brigitte, was for him to go through the defamation, for him to win the defamation, because he actually was not the man pictured in that wedding photo. And then for her and her husband to be able to publicize the newspapers, we won a defamation trial against the crazy journalist who said that Brigitte was born a man. Oh, well, Brigitte just won a defamation case. You keep hearing that. She's won defamation cases pertaining to this. That is how they are doing it. Again, going after the details, but not the substance of what people are investigating. Now, you have to understand that by now, within France, the internet was just on fire with conspiracies. I mean, first and foremost, where the heck is the first husband? Where is Andre Louis? Well, as fate would have it, shortly after Sylvie Bommel publishes her book looking into the matter, on October 8th, 2020, suddenly Tiffany, the second daughter, announces in a weekly magazine that actually her dad already died. A year ago, actually. In 2019. People are starting to pry. And now she's like, actually, he's dead. He died a year ago. Here is the quote that was published in Paris Match announcing that. Tiffany said, "My father died. I buried him on December 24th, 2019 in the strictest privacy." How convenient. How convenient, right? That, like, I don't know. The First Lady's first husband, who everybody's starting to look into, just drops dead right at the moment where people realize something's going on here. I would say it's remarkably convenient for the Macron family. Also, by the way, this is kind of weird, but Tiffany announcing her dad's death in that Paris Match magazine, which we know Paris Match is controlled to some degree by Mimi Marchand. It's one of the places where she gets particular photos and storylines published. Well, what's even stranger is that Tiffany got the details wrong about her dad's death. Yeah, isn't that really weird? One, he was not buried at all. He was cremated, and his cremation date was not on the 24th, as she said, but 4 days later on December 28th. How odd. Maybe the journalist just made a mistake. Another weird coincidence happening in this never-ending saga. Now, how do we know the actual dates? Well, let's go back to that first cousin. Remember, that first cousin, not very happy with this family. Okay. Andre Louis felt that he had been burned by the presidential couple in filing this suit. And so he opened up to the journalist, Emmanuel, on his own about the funeral service. So apparently the story goes that he had received a call from Andre's sisters. Again, this is his first cousin, informing him of the death and that there was going to be a quick funeral. He provided the journalist with the booklet that was actually distributed at this very quick funeral. And I will tell you, it is a very odd choice for an obituary photo. Here it is. Here we go. Andre Ozier, of a ceremony taking place, which Tiffany got the date wrong by accident, I'm sure, December 28th, 2019. I mean, who would announce this, by the way, a year after? It's just crazy. And then at the bottom there, I think that means our friend, our brother, our companion, our grandfather, and our papa. There it is. Now, even for a far left journalist who is not prone to conspiracy theories, even for Emmanuel Anizan, it seemed to her to be a very weird choice for a photo for a death announcement. So she asked him flat out, like, this is weird. What's going on with this choice of a photo? And the cousin told her, John Louis replied to her and said, quote, "I think this was the only photo that turned up when they went looking for one for the funeral because all of the others had been destroyed." Destroyed? Emmanuel muses. I am not Natasha Ray, but I still am a bit puzzled. What? So all that's left for a man's life in pictures, apart from his wedding photo, is a photo of him in a swimsuit to illustrate his final departure? She asks in her book. Yeah, somehow every other photo from his life had been destroyed. Okay. So you're probably wondering, what the heck is going on here? What's going on? Well, Xavier Poussard was actually able to trace the real Andre Louis through banking records. It turns out that he never worked at Credit du Nord, that bank, which is why so many other journalists were effectively chasing their tails. And so he gives that information to Emmanuelle Anison because she's much more of a mainstream journalist and she might be able to pick up some more. He also provides her with access to a Facebook group. He's like, no, this man did exist. And it's filled with John Louis's old work colleagues from the bank that he actually worked at. And he's helping her to assuage her suspicions and doubts that this man plausibly maybe never even existed. And here is how Emmanuelle Anison concludes the chapter of the story of her research into him. And this is, again, about the husband, Brigitte's first husband, Andre Louis Ozier. She wrote, quote, "His sisters wouldn't talk to me, nor his children, so I called a few former colleagues via Facebook groups of former bankers. They all speak enthusiastically of Day, kind, cult, polite, who talked a lot about his children whom he adored. Day, who smoked too much, whom they felt was lonely, devastated. One of them sent me a professional collection of portraits from the mid-2000s where Andre poses serious in a suit and a tie among his colleagues at the Amiens bank branch. The 1974 groom is clearly recognizable, even if he has started to lose his hair. These colleagues kept in touch with each other after retirement, but not him, who cut all ties with them too. Andre Ozier has disappeared from the radar's scope. For my part, I tried to contact members of the Ozier family, but no one wanted to reply. Susan Spray, John Louis Ozier's first wife, even hurriedly hung up the phone on me when I told her I was interested in Brigitte Macron. Ah, yes, no, thank you. No, thank you, sir. Ooh la la, no, goodbye. Click. Elsewhere, John Louis, who attended the funeral, tells her that it took place, quote, just 4 days after the death. No information had leaked to the newspapers. The Élysée Palace wanted it to happen quickly, and it seems that Emmanuel Macron was personally involved in making sure that it did. The express funeral, organized on the sly and in a hurry early in the morning at 8:30 a.m., before opening time to avoid journalists. The booklet with the photo was placed on the chairs. A dozen people were present, seated in separate clans. On one side, Andre's sisters. On the other, Brigitte's 3 children, Tiffany, Lawrence, and Sebastian. Brigitte Macron did not attend. Andre's companion, I guess this means like a partner, maybe someone he was in a relationship with but never married, unknown to all, was also there at some distance. Early side, after 20 minutes, the ceremony was over and everyone walked out immediately. Afterwards, I went with the Ozier children and Andre's sisters for a coffee and a croissant. Members of security staff stood on guard outside. We ended up letting them in because it was so cold. The atmosphere was heavy and everyone left quickly afterwards. Okay. Quite the funeral, very quick. Why is the Élysée Palace involved? Also, guys, isn't it kind of weird that Brigitte would not, out of some basic respect, go attend the funeral of a man that she was married to for 32 years? So the Élysée Palace got involved to keep it hush-hush, but they didn't attend the funeral? Does that even sound right? The father to your children? Also, and this is incredible, according to the first cousin, John Louis, at the funeral, he spoke to Andre's partner, who told him that he had found tickets to Africa in Andre's jacket pocket, plus a large amount of money in it. He said, quote, he had emptied his accounts, organized his departure on the sly. He dreamed so much of going to Africa again. Okay. All right, guys, what are we to make of that? All right. It is very weird for someone's lover, companion, partner, whatever you want to call it, to say that. What really happened to Andre Louis, who was cremated very quickly, even though his daughter says he was buried? What accidentally says he was buried? Sometimes you mix that up. What really happened to Andre Louis? What drove him to become a recluse all of a sudden, not associating with his former bank friends from the 70s? How did all of those photos of him suddenly get destroyed? He's only left with one of him. He's got 2 photos. Here's me in the wedding, and here's me on a beach in my trunks. And these are the only photos available of my life. Doesn't that seem like a systematic destruction? I can't think of any circumstance where that would be the case, that photos would just all be gone, as if you would keep every photo of yourself in your childhood in one house. Did he actually die? Did he escape with the assistance of the Élysée Palace? Did he try to escape, but the Élysée Palace intervened? Imaginations can certainly run wild right now, right? But we can't confirm anything, obviously. What I can tell you is that, oddly enough, another journalist named Sophie Descartes reported in a 2022 issue of Paris Match, which was published, that André Louis ended his days in a psychiatric clinic with a guard at his door supervised by Alexander Benalla. He's a very controversial figure. The Élysées' notorious and controversial security chief of staff who ended up in a huge scandal known as the Benalla scandal, okay? Why would that journalist say that? I can tell you that that information was instantly denied the same day on Twitter by Tefon. But despite the family being extremely litigious in nature, always going after people for defamation, the Macrons never did sue that journalist who said that for defamation. I think that's a perfect place for us to pause, because that's a lot of information and a lot of pieces that you have to put together.
Ce qui est également troublant dans cette histoire, c'est que la seule personne dans la famille de Brigitte, dans ses enfants, je vous rappelle qu'elle a plusieurs enfants, à prendre la parole, c'est Tiphaine. Pourquoi il n'y a que Tiphaine qui ose prendre la parole et qui ose parler? Pourquoi les autres enfants ne se manifestent pas pour apporter leur soutien à leur mère? Alors cet été, il me semble, enfin l'été dernier, il me semble que l'une des autres filles de Brigitte en a parlé, qu'il y a eu cette fameuse photo sur un bateau où Brigitte Macron était en maillot de bain et qui avait fait vraiment beaucoup parler, en mode ouais, il y a une forme entre les jambes, machin, tatata, je sais pas quoi. Beaucoup de gens avaient commencé à se poser des questions, ça avait relancé le débat encore une fois, et ce que je comprends pas, c'est pourquoi en fait, la justice ne fait rien. Pourquoi, si c'est si grave et si c'est si important, pourquoi personne n'en parle? Pourquoi Macron les Macron restent silencieux? J'essaie de comprendre pourquoi on n'a que Tiphaine qui prend la parole. Pourquoi c'est toujours Tiphaine qui est mise en avant, Tiphaine qui va sur les plateaux télé, TPMP, etc. J'essaie de comprendre, vraiment, j'essaie de comprendre. Et je peux comprendre aussi qu'il y a des gens que ça offusque, qu'il y ait une enquête sur ce genre de sujet. Moi, je parle vraiment du côté immonde, vraiment, de la relation. Pour moi, c'est une relation bizarre. On parle d'une femme qui a un certain âge avec un jeune garçon à l'époque. L'inverse, c'est pareil, c'est tout aussi dégoûtant, et ça aurait fait plus parler. On va pas se mentir, ça aurait fait beaucoup plus polémique. J'ai vu des commentaires sous l'ancienne vidéo, enfin la vidéo d'hier, où les gens disaient oui, mais c'est limite de la misogynie. Comment ça, une femme ne peut pas être belle en portant une jupe, en étant une pin-up, en mettant des jupes courtes? Moi, ma mère, elle a porté des jupes et c'est une femme très bien, très respectable. C'est pas ce que j'ai dit. En aucun cas, j'ai dit qu'elle n'est pas respectable. En aucun cas, je n'ai dit que les gens qui portent des mini-jupes ne sont pas des personnes respectables. Mais excusez-moi, mais on parle d'ici d'une vision qu'ont des gamins, des ados de 15 ans vis-à-vis d'une meuf qui a 30 ans, 39 ans, 40 ans. En fait, c'est pas possible. Je suis désolé, moi, mes profs, quand ils avaient 40 ans, hommes comme femmes, j'étais jamais là en mode waouh, waouh, que ce soit au collège ou au lycée. Vous voyez? Enfin, je veux dire, j'avais aucune attirance envers mes professeurs. Je ne sais pas si vous vous rendez compte quand même de la folie. Le fait de décrire ta professeure et d'édulcorer et de faire un espèce de micmac autour de tout cela en mode « Waouh, c'était une femme voluptueuse, très sexy, très belle ». Mais pourquoi en fait changer la vérité? Pourquoi changer vraiment le monde, l'histoire? Est-ce qu'il y a réellement des gens qui ont dit ça? C'est ça que j'aimerais savoir. Et pourquoi porter toujours une espèce d'écharpe sur toutes les photos? Est-ce qu'il y a la pomme d'Adam à cacher? Est-ce qu'il y a eu une opération? Est-ce que si? Est-ce que ça? Les gens sont en droit de savoir, les gens sont en droit de demander. Et surtout, en tant que peuple français, en tant que personnes qui ont élu ces personnes, encore une fois, et je le répéterai jusqu'à la fin de ces vidéos, jusqu'à la fin du documentaire, on est en droit de demander, bien évidemment, pourquoi ils ne prennent pas la parole? Est-ce que c'est vrai? Est-ce que c'est faux? Pourquoi autant de médias français dépeintent Candace Owens comme une complotiste qui fait de la diffamation, machin, alors qu'elle n'a apporté que du factuel pour le moment? Pourquoi si? Enfin, il y a plein de questions vraiment qui me turlupine. On est en droit de se demander, ni plus ni moins. Je vous rappelle que c'est nous qui avons élu ces personnes. C'est nous qui avons fait que ces personnes sont au pouvoir. Et les Français, on a vraiment perdu, je vous dis, hein, on en a parlé dans les premières vidéos, dans les premiers épisodes, mais on a vraiment perdu la niaque qu'on avait, on a perdu nos coronesses, on est vraiment devenus des espèces de petits, comment on pourrait appeler ça, des petits pigeons, on a peur, vraiment. Mais bon, après, je peux comprendre aussi qu'il y a des gens qui ne veulent pas en parler et c'est tout à fait normal. En tout cas, c'est la fin de cette vidéo. J'espère qu'elle vous aura plu. Hâte de découvrir les 3 prochains épisodes. Est-ce que nous allons apprendre plus de choses? Est-ce qu'il va y avoir du croustillant, des rebondissements? Ou est-ce que c'est juste du factuel que l'on a pu voir partout ailleurs sur Internet? Xavier Poussard, la personne qui avait commencé à un petit peu faire en sorte que cette histoire devienne connue, avec notamment Natacha Ray, est revenu sur Twitter. Est-ce que lui aussi va devoir nous faire des espèces de témoignages, des nouvelles révélations? Nous verrons bien, hein, mais Xavier Poussard était dernièrement un petit peu dans le débaudra, donc nous verrons bien. Dites-moi ce que vous en pensez, donnez-moi votre avis le plus sincère en commentaire, avec bien évidemment courtoisie et respect. N'hésitez pas à vous abonner et activer la cloche de notification pour être toujours au rendez-vous. Lâchez votre meilleur pouce bleu et me rejoindre sur les différents réseaux sociaux. Moi je vous fais plein de gros bisous, je vous dis à la prochaine, prenez soin de vous, bye guys.